Sweeney Morning Star journalist. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So your message to Turkey to stop attacks and airstrikes to Kurdish areas and your comments about these attacks.
Well, what we're seeing is clearly an escalation of Turkey's war on Kurds, and we've seen the airstrikes on Turkey saying that it's targeting PKK positions in Iraq, but clearly the airstrike started with an attack on the Maximum refugee camp, which is home to around 15,000 people that fled state operations in the 1990s, where 3,000 villages were burnt to the ground in forced assimilation operations. So this was a deliberately chosen target, as was the was Shengal, which is again, this was home to an ISIS genocide in 2014, with 5,000 men and boys executed and more than 7,000 women taken into captivity and sold into sexual slavery. Now people were starting slowly to return to Shengal, so it's clear what the message that the Turkish state is trying to send. What kind of concerns me as well is the Maximum refugee camp is administered by the United Nations, the UNHCR, so they're the refugee agency, and I've contacted them every single day since the attack started. So this has been going on for 2 weeks now, asking for comment and asking them to speak out against the attacks, and also the year-long embargo that's been imposed by the Kurdistan regional government. And camp officials are describing conditions there. They're short of supplies, they're short of much needed medical aid, and the international community has remained silent, and the UNHCR has not issued any kind of statement condemning either the airstrikes or the embargo. And this is very serious, actually.
How do you comment on the attitude of European countries and international institutions on Turkey's occupation attacks to Kurdistan?
Well, this is not, what we're seeing now is an escalation. This is not really anything new. And in 2018 we had Operation Olive Branch. Last year, Operation Peace Spring, and this was Turkey, which is NATO's second biggest army, invasion of a sovereign country, Syria, and an attempt at a genocide of Kurds. It's patently obvious. There were allegations of chemical weapons being used in Afrin, and again last year the chemical attack on Serikaniye. But the international community has remained silent over those. We've seen the extrajudicial execution of Hevrin Kalev. I cited Erdogan for war crimes when he came to visit Britain, because he's responsible for these attacks. He's carrying them out with jihadists. But Turkey's NATO's second largest army, so there isn't not a bullet could be fired or a bomb could be dropped without the connivance of NATO, without the connivance of the United Nations, without the connivance of the European Union. So this isn't just Turkey's war. This is their war as well. And while we appeal for them for support, we know that they don't support democracy in Turkey. A free and democratic Turkey would threaten their imperialist ambitions for the region. Turkey has an important geopolitical position because it straddles the border. It sits on the border, of Syria, Iran, and Iraq. All three countries where the imperialists want to see regime change. All three countries that have vast oil reserves. So of course they don't want to see democracy thriving either in those countries or in Turkey, which it's happy to prop up the Erdogan regime.
How can the Kurdish freedom movement deal with the prejudice that surrounds being labeled as a terrorist organization?
Well, that's a very interesting question, actually, and it's a difficult one, because the attacks on Kurds don't just exist inside Kurdistan, in Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. Of course, every kind of act of resistance is branded an act of terrorism. This also happens. We saw very recently the attacks by Turkish nationalists in Vienna, where they were making the grey wolves the Grey Wolf salute, and they were attacking Kurdish women. And the response from the Turkish state has been, of course, that these weren't just Kurdish women protesting against femicide. They were militants from the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK militants, and what they mean by that is, is terrorists. So there are very, very real and serious consequences for this. But I think again, this is about building a mass and critical campaign. For example, in Britain, I think what's absolutely essential is to make the cause of the Kurdish movement mainstreamed in the same way that the Palestinian freedom movement has entered consciousness, not just among the Labour movement, but also society as well. Because we can see the way that Israel treats Palestinians is exactly the same way that Turkey treats Kurds, and this is despite Erdogan's protestations and his claim to be, on the side of Palestinians. I mean, this is just bluster on his part, and his part of his trying to cultivate this image of him as a new sultan, the leader of the Muslim and Islamic world. He has no interest in the Palestinians, because if he did, then he would also treat Kurds the same way. So this is something really important to overcome. And part of that again lies in the delisting of the PKK as a terrorist organization. This is something again that Britain, the European Union, and the US have happily gone along with at Turkey's behest. But I think this is also something to do with the nature of global imperialism, as well. But this is at the essence, this is a struggle for human rights and democracy, and that's what's at the core of this. So that's, I think, partly the way to overcome that as well. It's not going to be easy. That's why we call it the struggle. But we should be very, very clear about that.
Recently, there have been serious attacks against women, especially in Kurds, both in northern Kurdistan and Rojava. 3 women in the Kobane were killed by aerial bombardment. Managers of the Women's Association were arrested in Ahmed. Tortured women were detained. How do you evaluate these pressures, and what do you think of that actions are related with?
Turkey sees free women as a threat, and that's been absolutely clear. Kurdish women have been at the forefront of the Kurdish resistance. They have built a semi-autonomous region in Rojava, an alternative society. Of course, women have played a key role in the People's Democratic Party, the HDP, and even the co-chair system, which allows for sex equality at all levels of the party and equal representation at all levels of the party. This has been branded a terrorist act. Now, we've seen that escalate very, very recently with attacks targeting Kurds, but predominantly Kurdish women. As you mentioned, 3 women killed in a Turkish drone strike in Kobane, and we've seen the attacks largely targeting Kurdish women. The appalling torture of Rojbin Jetin in Diyarbakir, where she was subjected to a 3.5-hour interrogation and torture, where she was mauled by dogs that were set upon her. So this is really an attack on women. Turkey is one of the most misogynistic states in the world. Women suffer incredible oppression. Erdogan thinks, of course, it's impossible to discriminate against women, but he wants to keep women out of political life. Now, this is what's happening. This is a clear message to say, don't get involved. Don't be part of political life. So it's an open attack on women. Today, Leyla Guven is in court today as part of the Democratic Society Congress case. So this is another prominent Kurdish woman that is being targeted. And we can look at the way that political prisoners are treated, and the women that are currently behind bars. Figen Yüksekdağ, Sebat Tunçel, Gultan Kishana. We could go on. The list could go on, but these are prominent women who are trying to play a role in political life. So this is sending a very, very clear message. And again, it's one that should be resisted, and one that people should be speaking out against. Instead, we're again met with a blanket silence. In fact, I think 2 or 3 years ago, I was in Diyarbakir, and the European Union sent a message out praising Turkey for its role in encouraging, in standing up for women's rights. And this was the day that the day before Figen Yüksekdağ was about to, she was standing trial. She faces life behind bars in isolation for what? For playing a role in democratic politics and society. So this is a very, very clear message to women: stay out of politics.
Yeah. So lastly, all this happening in Turkey, why is European media and UK mainstream media is being silenced against all these?
Well, that's we could probably have quite a wide-ranging discussion around this. I think partly the reason that the media are silent, one of the reasons is the issue of a free and democratic media and media ownership. Many of them, so for example, The Guardian in Britain, 1 year after the failed coup attempt, they gave President Erdogan column space to lecture about freedom and human rights and democracy on Turkey. It was absolutely astonishing, and we organised a letter in response to that, signed by Kurdish and Turkish organisations, journalists, trade unions. Front benchers from the Labour Party had signed an open letter, and The Guardian refused to publish it. They initially said it was too long and they wouldn't edit it down and publish it. But this is also how the effect of the Turkish state, and a lot of newspapers rely on advertising. So the Turkish state, for example, the Turkish Airlines will pay millions and millions of pounds in advertising deals. So of course they're not going to, the newspapers and the media are not going to say anything too critical of Turkey. But also there's the whole connivance and the relationship between, particularly between Britain and the Turkish state. So Britain is one of the biggest suppliers of arms to Turkey. Britain has something like £8 billion worth of bilateral trade deals within the two countries. So now that they put human lives over democracy. And I remember when Theresa May came in 2017, she came to Turkey straight from visiting Donald Trump. She hot-footed it across the ocean to come to the presidential palace, and she struck an arms deal with President Erdogan. And I said, well, what about why aren't you going to raise anything about human rights and democracy in the country? And they said, well, this is human rights and trade are distinct, as though she was going there to sell him medical supplies or food, but she was selling him arms that were going to be used against his own people, but also against Kurds, not only in Turkey but in Syria, Iran, and Iraq. It's a big issue that we face, and it's certainly a big challenge for the media to start portraying the reality of what's happening in Turkey. Many people don't know. They still see Turkey as somewhere that's a nice, cheap holiday destination. When I show them photographs of Cizre and the Saibin, they're astonished at what they see. They think that this is Syria, somewhere like Aleppo. And I say, no, this is where you go on holiday. This is Turkey. This is a country that's at war with its own people. This is a country that's waging a genocide against Kurds. So that's the message that we need to get across. But part of that is, again, about building a critical mass of solidarity and a critical mass of opposition, not just to Erdogan, but a critical mass in support of Kurds.
Steve Sweeney, Morning Star journalist, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you very much.
Kurdish lives matter. That's the important message that we must get across to. Kurdish lives matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.